Number of flowers per cluster, I talked about this before. I want to just do a quick anecdote on this one because I think it helps drive the point home. A friend of mine was working with a hoop house tomato grower. My friend was his consultant, and he was had been giving all these principles and saying, take your soil test, balance the minerals, blah blah blah. He was doing the inoculants. I like to say he had the Kool-Aid. He was on the bandwagon, and he was so far on the bandwagon down the rabbit hole that he was taking weekly soil tests in season to assess mineral availability, nutrient availability for his plants. That's the next level of sophistication you can go to, because guess what? If your plants have everything they need, they can really do amazing things, and it's well worth $25 a week to get a regular. Say if you can, be tweaking things and producing another $500 a week in production. Right, and it's cost benefit analysis on a production scale. Actually, more rigorous in-season monitoring is not a bad idea. Anyway, this guy had gotten his soil test back, his in-season soil test telling him functionally he was low on manganese, and so he said, "All right, I can do this." He took some manganese sulfate, solubilized it in the water, put it in his irrigation line into the house. Felt pretty proud of himself. He's like, "Look, I can do a soil test. I can make my own." Woke up at 2 o'clock the next morning. He did his math wrong, and he put in 10 times as much manganese as he was supposed to. Oops. So he called my friend up, who was his consultant, and said, "Hey, this is what happened." And he's like, "Well, you take the salt, you solubilize it in water, you put the water into the ground." It's kind of too late. We'll have to see what happens. Long story short, luckily, because the plant was, the whole system was functioning well, what happened was that the tomato plants, instead of putting out 3 or 4 or 4 or 5 flowers per cluster, as they would normally doing, put out between 12 and 15 flowers per cluster, because manganese is a reproductive element. It's correlated with seed, and it's anything. Anybody knows anything about infertility, whether it's an animal infertility or human infertility or plant infertility, manganese is critically related to that. Interestingly, Roundup, right, is one of the things Roundup does is chelate manganese. So many people are suffering from manganese deficiencies. I think it might have some correlation with infertility in humans. Anyways, the extra manganese in the environment caused those tomato plants to set 3 times as many flowers as they normally had. Because everything else was functioning well, the plant was able to basically set all those flowers and fill all those fruit. And functionally, by overdosing the plant with manganese, he tripled his yield on that flowering cycle. That was a temporary blip. That manganese got used up, and then it went back down to 4 to 5 flowers per cluster for the rest of the season, which actually goes to show that manganese was a limiting factor. That if there had been more manganese, everything else was in place to actually have a much higher yield. I talk about target levels of manganese being 80 to 90 parts per million, which is dramatically higher than a lot of people talk about, and that's because we understand that when everything else is functioning well, some of these trace elements really are the limiting factors in systems performing at much higher levels than we would consider plausible. A friend of mine who's on the board of the organization, has a farm in southeastern Mass, did a little experiment with manganese and some tomato plants, and he basically took like a bag of manganese sulfate and just sort of sprayed over the land, like in this corner. Like he just way overdosed the land with manganese. And he had some cherry tomatoes down there. He had his row, and then there were some at the end of the row. And those cherry tomatoes had 100 fruit clusters. You know what a cluster is? Like the fronds, like it's got this, right? Like imagine 100 cherry tomatoes on one cluster. Right? With multiple clusters, you begin to see more red than green or orange or whatever color the fruit is on that plant. Really kind of exciting what's possible. So anyway, you see the plants go from 4 to 5 flowers per cluster down to 3 to 4, down to 2 to 3. When you notice that happening, you notice at the beginning of the year there's more flowers per cluster and then they begin to be less. There's a reason why that's happening. There's a reason why the leaf is changing size from broad to skinny. There's a reason why the color is changing from dark green to light green. There's a reason why the stem shape is changing from round to oval. There's all these nuances that happen in the plant over time that have some basic root cause. And the more you're able to actually look at them, notice them in time, and correlate them to something, the more you can address that and not sort of say, okay, this is part of the plant getting old and falling apart and dying. Right? We have the ability to be proactive. This is the concept I want to put out there, even though I don't have enough practical information to really leave you feeling totally empowered. There's a bunch of good information out there. One good book that I don't think we have on our website, which lays all this out, is called Mineral Nutrition in Higher Plants. And Marschner is the editor, Marschner, I believe. It's a really good book with, biologists from around the planet, actually, all over the world, and various literature correlating visual symptomology, growth habits, mineral deficiencies, sort of laying it all out as pretty good formal literature.